What's up, everybody? My name is Manon and you're watching Witchin' and Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. Well, here we are, midwinter, and things for the coming year are hopefully looking up. Let's admit it, last year wasn't exactly the smoothest seas to traverse in our journeys through it. The pandemic being one of the largest wrenches thrown in the gears of everybody's plans, hopes, and dreams. Well, here we are in a new year, and it seems that things will be looking up in this year to come. Many potentials and new situations have already come to fruition, and we're only a few weeks into 2021. I'm confident and excited for what the goddess is going to bring forth. The first sabbat of the year that is celebrated is Imbolg. This sabbat definitely symbolizes new beginnings to come on many different levels. In this episode of Witchin' and Working, I'd like to discuss this sabbat and hopefully teach you a little bit about it and encourage you to celebrate this sabbat yourself. With this being said, roll that intro. Welcome back, everybody. So, as I mentioned earlier, this episode will be talking about the Sabbat of Imbolg. Imbolg takes place on February 2nd. Some celebrate February 1st also, but I personally celebrate on the 2nd. This is a celebration that is basically midwinter and is used to encourage hope and strength for the returning sun to come. The winter months for our ancestors were a hard and tough time that many of us today take for granted. The modern day luxuries of keeping warm, having a sturdy shelter, accessible clothing, and most importantly, food that can be ordered and delivered with a few simple pushes of some buttons. During the winter months, centuries past, the climate in the winter months were dark and dreary, and many times took the lives of animals and people both, more so than any other time of the year. There's a reason our wildlife cousins prepare and store up for the winter months, as did our ancestors. Even peoples today who live up in the very northern regions of the world still do this. In fact, there's multiple TV programs that are accessible that actually feature this survival and exploit it for the entertainment of those of us who choose to live the less extreme life of struggle like those portrayed on the programming. Again, it was and is a very tough time for the living, and the winter has death many times written all over it, so it's no wonder our ancestors performed a lot of sympathetic magic during these times to call to and urge back the warming sun to once again spin the wheel of the seasons back towards the spring and summer paradise. A lot of Imbolg tales, stories, and lore originates from Ireland. Brigid was a very important goddess to the Irish, whom was seen as a great mother goddess. Brigid correspondences involved fertility, metalsmithing, creativity, healing, protection, and especially a guardian of children. Many times she was dressed up as the waiting bride, awaiting for her sun lord to return to her once again in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Young women would make a doll of Brigid and then parade her through the town door to door asking for alms for poor Biddy, which people would give to her, and in return they would receive good fortune in the harvest to come. Imbolg was a tradition so ingrained in the Irish culture that the church itself had a lot of trouble trying to get rid of the Sabbath, and in fact, as with many of our pagan holidays, renamed this day to St. Brigid's Day to try and convert the holiday instead of stamp it out. In France, they also had a deity that was celebrated and honored during these hard times that was very much close to the same aspects as Brigid. Saint Blaise was a saint of winter protection and healing. He was once widely worshipped by the Celtic Bretons. Knowing this, we can now see where we get the term blaze from, as in a blazing fire. Just like many of our other Sabbath celebrations, there are usually a few different names they're called, which makes sense because paganism was spread far and wide across many cultures, so obviously the terms for these holidays are going to be different. This isn't to say that the content of the celebration would be that much different across the cultures, but the names, yes, for sure, very different. Two other terms for Imbolg were Imbolc and Oimelc, which both translate to ewe's milk. In days of old, ewes, female sheep, would lactate, and this would be a sign that the harsh winter would soon be coming to an end. In Cornwall, this ewe's milk was gathered and mixed with cider, mashed apples, and honey, and a traditional drink was made to honor this event. The Romans during this time would honor the goddess Diana and Venus, whom are both goddesses of love. The crocus is a flower that held a special place in these winter months, as just like the ewe's milk making the hope for the waxing sun, The crocus would be the first of the flowers to pop up through the snow, marking a soon-to-be ending of the darker months. Many Romans would pick these flowers and adorn houses, altars, and themselves to bring forth this blessed energy. The month of February was dedicated to the goddess Februa and the god Februs. Februa was the goddess of fresh starts, which, considering the time frame of where this month lies in the wheel of the year, it makes total sense for this month to mark a fresh start, magically and symbolically. The Romans also had a game they played in ancient times that was mentioned briefly in an 8th century manuscript called the Book of Lismore. The game featured a maiden and lamb at one end of the board and a crone and dragon at the other. The object of the game was for the lamb to traverse the board and kill the dragon, which in turn accomplished the transition of the crone transforming back to the virgin goddess for the coming spring. In Nordic tradition, Imbolg was known as Distingtide. This was a day when farmers would bless their fields with sacred herbs, ash, and salt by strewing it across the fields to prepare them for planting in the spring to come. Yet another name for Imbolg that was brought about by the more Christianized converted of the peoples is Candlemas. Candlemas derived from the ritual practice of sympathetic magic, which involved lighting fires to urge back the sun and warm the earth once again. In Anglo-Celtic cultures, it was popular for a young woman to enter into a ritual circle carrying a circlet of candles to represent these fires of anticipation. This circlet represented the wheel of the year, and it was lit up to urge back the sun. Later on, the custom was adapted of wearing a circlet of candles on the head as a chaplet, so to speak. To this day, many of us pagans, myself included, utilize this practice in our Imbolg Sabbat celebrations, though for safety purposes, I've designed a crown for the maiden that consists of LED lights running off of a small battery pack. So you may say, Manon, don't be such a wuss, use real candles. Listen, I get it, but I myself hosted, ironically enough, an Imbolg Sabbat about 3 years ago in which I leaned over the altar to grab something and my hair caught on fire. So it did a pretty good number too, and it wasn't pretty, but I did escape any serious injury. Regardless, this made me realize how easy it is for hair to catch on fire, and the whole idea of lit candles being only inches from loose hair kind of freaks me out now, and I definitely don't want some young maiden's hairdo destroyed, or even worse, serious burns because of my ignorance. So LEDs it is for this witch when it comes to the Imbolg crown anyways. You can make your own crown of lights quite easily. Simply go to your nearest arts and crafts store and get a smaller wreath that fits your head. And most all of these stores will carry these little LED wraps I was speaking of, and they run off of a little switch that can be concealed. Get some flowers and other Imbolg decorations and adorn the crown with it, and you have a crown of lights for years to come to use during your Sabbat Imbolg celebration. Should you choose not to create a crown of lights, you can also just make and utilize a circle of lights instead. With this, you can use real candles safely. Same concept as the crown of lights, except with the circle of lights, you will simply carry it into your circle lights, not wear it on your head. Another winter pastime from our ancestors that has been carried through to present day is attempting the prediction of when spring will finally begin to show itself in its first stirrings of vibrant life. One tradition that represents this is our present day Groundhog Day celebration and tradition. This happens on February 2nd, and a groundhog named traditionally as Punxsutawney Phil will poke his head out of his burrow to take a gander at his surroundings and sense his climate and predict the spring. If he sees a shadow, he'll promptly duck back into his burrow, therefore predicting another 6 weeks of winter to come. In Celtic lands, it was thought that if one heard a lark singing on Imbolg Day, that this was a sign of early spring to come. Larks are sacred to the god, and it was thought that if one heard the lark, it was because the god was swiftly returning to find his awaiting goddess bride and bring forth the warmth of spring. Grain or corn dollies are another symbolic representation that is very popular during Imbolg. Our ancestors would gather sheaves of grain, often corn, wheat, straw, or barley, and fashion a humanoid-looking dolly that would be used throughout the year as a representation of the goddess. In the summer months, she was made to look pregnant and bountiful. As the wheel turned on towards the fall and winter months, she would be dressed and decorated to represent the wise and powerful crone. During Imbolg, she was once again dressed in a bridal outfit and decorated with lots of fertility symbolism around her as she was laid within a basket. This was symbolic of her as the virgin bride awaiting the sun god to return so they could start the creation and magic of bringing back the spring and the fertile months ahead. Sunwheels are yet another little trinket that can be made as a fun craft during Imbolg. These are also called Brigid's crosses, and again, any of your arts and craft stores will carry the ingredients and raw materials to create these symbols of the goddess. A sunwheel is simply an equilateral cross in the center of a wheel as shown. Crossroads also figure prominently in the Imbolg tradition. Much like Samhain, Imbolg too was a night where many of our ancestors believed that the dead walked around and visited the living. It was believed that these spirits would seek the safety of a crossroads, so it wasn't surprising that many of our ancestors would in fact perform ritual practice at a crossroads on this night. In doing this practice, they would also build small fires around the crossroads area to warm the nights and bring forth warmth for the wandering. It was also very much a tradition during this time to bury negativity at a crossroads so that the negativity would be believed to be trapped forever, never being able to escape and wreak havoc on the living. Wells were very popular and significant during Imbolg to our ancestors. Wells were thought to be symbolic of the birth canal from which most life ultimately comes from. This is where we get the custom of throwing coins into a wishing well in hopes that our wishes and hopes will come true. Throughout the centuries, many ancient and popular wells were covered up by the church to try and stamp out this pagan practice. I wonder if people realize they're actually performing a pagan ritual when they throw their loose change into the fountains at the local mall. Valentine's Day is a holiday we celebrate today in February that originally, as most holidays, had its first stirrings spring up from an old pagan holiday. The particular holiday was the Roman holiday of Lupercalia. This was the beginning of the wolves' mating season, and because wolves mate for life, it was considered a sign of the coming spring and the eternal union of the god and goddess. The heart itself has most always been considered a symbol of love throughout the ages, so it's no wonder why it was entwined in with our modern-day St. Valentine's Day. On a more gory note, ancient Celts, Druids, during this time would take the heart from a living white bull and examine its final convulsions in order to divine the future. Imbolg is also an excellent time to convene with your fellow craft peeps or friends around an open fire pit. Bringing back the light is an important aspect of this Sabbath, and this can be a ritual practice that can be done without any of your non-pagan friends even being the wiser of it. Sit around an open fire or even a fireplace in your home and make a small gathering of it. While sitting around the fire and sipping hot cocoa and nibbling on finger foods, tell stories and reminisce about the past year and even discuss your plans for the coming year and your hopes and dreams for the future to come. Again, like most of the Sabbats, we're celebrating another fire festival. Why not make the best of the colder times and urge forth that warmth and blessing? Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch in the Working. Do you celebrate or have you ever celebrated Imbolg? If so, let us all know in the comments below. What did you do? Will you celebrate Imbolg this year? Please subscribe to my channel and tell others about Witch in the Working also, and ring that little bell to be reminded of future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals, and I'll see you next episode. Blessings to all of you for the future year to come.